All right, so we are live, and we're going to be talking today about the King James Version, and we are uh, going to be uh, also taking questions and answers from you in the live today. So if you have questions and answers, or not answers, if you have questions, go ahead and post those in the chat. We are live on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and I am gonna we're gonna start on that in just a second. Um, so today we're talking about the King James Version. And what's interesting is scholars will tell you that the King James Version of the Bible is the least accurate version of the Bible for a number of reasons. And we're going to go through several of those different reasons, and also take your questions in the chat. So if you've got a question, you can go ahead and post that in the chat on Instagram or Facebook. I'm sorry, Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. So let me tell you a little bit about the King James Version of the Bible. One of the things that people often imagine that uh, makes it more accurate is actually the thing that makes it less accurate. So people will assume that because the King James Version was translated longer ago, that it makes it closer to the source, right? Closer in time to when Jesus or Abraham or whoever was around. And so that makes it more accurate. But in fact, since the King James Version has been translated hundreds of years later, archaeologists have discovered more and more ancient manuscripts, and which means they have a much better understanding of what the text says. Because what you see as you track along the manuscripts from the oldest to the newest is you find things that have been changed or that have been added. The easiest example is to go to the end of the book of Mark, and in the end of the book of Mark, you're going to see a bunch of text about holding snakes and taking poison, and all of that is not in the original manuscripts. We don't have the actual original manuscripts. Like, we don't have something that was written by Moses or Paul or any of that. But what happens is, when scholars arrange them with the oldest all the way up to the youngest, you see, like, in these oldest manuscripts, they're the same. The book of Mark ends, and then all of a sudden, this extra ending appears, and then it keeps appearing later. And so you can see that it was added. And if you are looking at an accurate translation of the Bible, you'll actually see that bracketed or an asterisk or something that says, hey, look, most ancient versions or the ancient manuscripts don't have this. This was added in. There's actually a bunch of verses like that. There are actually some verses that we are so certain that they were added in that they just don't even appear. You'll see, like, it'll be like chapter 17, verse 16, 17, 18, and then you'll see verse 20, and you're paying really close attention, which nobody does. You'll say, well, where's verse 20? Well, verse 20 was added. And, like, some of those, it's wild. Like, you actually see it written in above in between the lines of text in one version, and then in the next version, in the next copy of the text, it's actually in the text, not just handwritten. Uh, so what that means about the King James Bible is that because it was based on a smaller number and less old manuscripts, they're just less accurate. Um, and and really, the King James Bible is not even fully a translation. At the time, there was a Bible translation called the Bishop's Bible, It was the most popular Bible translation on the market, and King James wanted his own version, and so they took the bishop's Bible. King James gave them some guidelines. For example, he wanted any church words to actually be the terms that they used for the Church of England. He didn't want any anti-monarchy stuff in there. And so they used the bishop's Bible and they revised the bishop's Bible into the King James Version. And when the King James Version came out, it's really funny because when the King James Version came out, the main complaint about the King James Version is the complaint that people have today, and that is that it's hard to understand because people don't talk that way anymore. But actually, people never talked the way you see in the King James Version of the Bible. They just didn't talk like that. What they often did when they were translating the King James Version is they took the syntax, like the order of the words in the original language, and then put the English words in that order. And if you've ever studied languages, you'll understand that words in different languages are ordered in different ways. And so when you put one language's word order in the word order of another language, it becomes way less understandable. So this is like this artificial type of English that no one has ever spoken. But then the other piece, and part of that, so you've got that problem with the language, but also there's been hundreds of years of development of the English language. And as language evolves, the definitions of words just evolve. And so a classic example is that the word charity right now means, when people hear it, they think of like giving to a nonprofit, right? And in the King James Version, when it uses the word charity, at that time, the word charity really meant love. And so if you're reading it from using your modern definition of words, you will just have wrong ideas as to what it says, because the words now mean something different. All of this sort of comes together. You can find it all in one place in Jude verse 22. So Jude verse 22, Jude only has one chapter. It says, "But of some have compassion, making a difference." Already, that word order is confusing and weird. And so we would think, though, if you were reading it, on some have compassion, making a difference, you think, okay, if we have compassion on someone, it can change their lives. It can make a difference. And we have a problem with the camera, so give me just a second. All right, sorry about that. The camera battery just died. So we're getting it all back going. Now, so all of the problems with the King James Version, the syntax, the problem with grammar and word meaning, you can see it all in Jude verse 22. So Jude verse 22, you see that it says, but of some have compassion, making a difference. So when you read that with our modern understanding of English and of the definitions of the words, you would probably assume that when we have compassion, we make a difference in their lives, right? The problem is in the time that the King James was written, that term "make a difference" meant something different. The idea of making a difference in somebody's life, that usage of the word really doesn't come into the meaning of English of that phrase doesn't happen until like the 1900s. So during the time of King James, make a difference actually meant make a distinction or a discernment between multiple things, right? So that's what make a difference means in the King James Version. So then take that definition of the word, make a difference, as making a distinction. You would probably think have compassion on some people, but try to be careful about who it is that you have compassion on. Problem is, the problem with this verse is not just the meaning of that phrase, make a difference. So because the King James Version is based on outdated manuscripts, the way the word is actually rendered in reliable translations, it changes. It's a change in the object of the word compassion, right? It's usually rendered, now have compassion on those who are doubting, right? Those who are making a difference or making a distinction between different things. So the idea, the accurate translation is of Jude 22 is have compassion on people who are doubting, who have questions. That is so different. And it is because the King James Version is just not an accurate translation. So we've done the King James Version. I'd love to answer some of your questions. If you've got them, you can post those in the chat. We have chat going on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And so just go ahead and look at those. I do not have my lovely assistant moderating the chat today. So I'm going to have to go back and forth between the different chats. I see Casper, I love your content. What part of the world am I in? I live in the DC area, which is a very interesting place to live. All right, on Instagram, Bill Stacy asks, what translation do you recommend? Well, that's really great. So, I'd say that I'm a deep skeptic. So that's what I trust is what scholars say. And there's a scholarly consensus. The most accurate English translation of the Bible on the market today is the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. And you can get that anywhere. You can just go on Amazon and type in New Revised Standard Updated Edition. If you'd like a study Bible version of that really is a collection of the leading biblical scholars that are making commentary on each of the verses, you have the SBL Study Bible. SBL stands for the Society of Biblical Literature. It is the largest and most well-respected professional academic organizations with peer-reviewed journals and that kind of stuff. The New Revised Standard Updated Edition, it's very accurate. It can not be as readable sometimes. So if you're looking for a readable translation, I recommend the CEB, the Common English Bible. All right, if you've got questions, you can put those in the chat. We are on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. While I am scrolling and looking for your questions, I'll give you a couple of book recommendations. I often get asked what books I recommend for to understand the Bible better. Actually, the link in my profile, I've got an Amazon list that lists a whole bunch of books that I recommend. The one that I tell everybody, if you're going to start with something, you need to start with this. It's called The History of the Bible by a guy named John Barton. John Barton is a brilliant scholar, but he also has something that is unique among scholars in that even though he is a leading scholar, he is also a he can also write in normal language. And what this book, The History of the Bible by John Barton, does is it really introduces you to the scholarly consensus of all the main ideas that scholars have agreed upon about the Bible. For example, that the Old Testament has multiple sources, that the Matthew, Mark, and Luke share each other as Matthew and Luke share Mark as a source, and there's also another source outside of that is generally called the Q source. So this is a great book. I tell you, you absolutely need to get this book if you're interested in the academic study of the Bible. And Jessica on TikTok says, I was wanting to research this stuff this year. Thanks for sharing. You are so welcome, Jessica. If you have questions or comments, we are live on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can go ahead and put those questions or comments in the chat. While you are making those questions, I'm going to tell you about some books that I think are pretty great. This is a brilliant book by a dear friend. His name is Brian McLaren. The book is called Faith After Doubt. And one of the things that he really sort of asserts in this book is that belief and doubt are not opposites. And I really appreciate this. I feel like anyone who is really questioning their faith, processing that, having if you're using that term, deconstruction, this is the book for you. The subtitle is Why Your Belief Stopped Working and What to Do About It. It's called Faith After Doubt by Brian McLaren. It's a brilliant book. If you have a question, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. I can tell you, talking about doubts and questions, one of the things that I think is really important is having a community of people that you're processing with. The problem, though, for a lot of people is that that their community, especially if you are in a more conservative area or you're in a more evangelical church setting, your community can be really homogenous. And especially places that demonize doubt and questions, it can be really difficult because you're wanting to ask people, you're wanting to process it with other people, but because of that pressure to not doubt, not ask questions, you can't do that. You feel unsupported, and a lot of people just feel alienated and lonely. And yet, because that is such an important part of your social support system, you can't violate that, right? And that's actually why a huge reason why we have this thing called Not Church. And Not Church is just an incredibly wonderful and supportive place full of people who have doubts and questions, people who identify as all kinds of different things spiritually, even atheists and agnostics. And we call it Not Church because people say it's like church. It's all the support, all the spiritual community. Like we have a channel there called Holding Space where, in an evangelical church, it might be called Prayer Requests. People post in there, like I'm having chest pains, I'm going to the hospital, we'll pray for them. It's like church, except nobody is telling you you're going to hell because you've got a tarot deck on your bedside table. Now, a lot of us in there have religious trauma, especially around being manipulated out of money. So one of the things we don't do is we don't accept donations. Everything we do is pay for what you get. So if you want to be part of the Not Church community, it's $3 a month. And you can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor. There's a link in my profile for that as well. But I can tell you that also, if $3 is too much for you, just let me know in a DM and I'll get you in for free. But it's really like pay for what you get. If it doesn't work, just stop paying. All right, I have a question from Contented Content. What do you tackle Paul's actual meaning on gays? I understand, or want to. I understand if you don't, it is complex. Yeah, I'd love to answer that. So Paul is interesting in that, so I guess the first thing you have to understand is when we're talking about gender, sexuality, those things are very much culturally defined, marriage, all of those things. And you actually, just throughout the Bible, you'll see a lot of difference, a lot of progression of thought. And each moment you see gender and marriage and sexuality, you are always seeing, really without veil, simply a reflection of what that culture, that surrounding culture, believed about those things. And so in the Bible, the way Dan McClellan describes it, I really appreciate. Sex is what an active sexual agent does on a passive sexual object. There is no sense of mutuality or anything like that. And so what that means is when you're engaging in parts of the Bible that are very culturally bound, you have to abstract the culture out and look at the underlying principles and concepts, and then apply those principles and concepts to the modern day. So when you do that with what people will often talk about in regards to Paul, one of the places that they talk about is Romans chapter 1. It says that men gave up their natural inclinations for unnatural inclinations and were inflamed with lust for each other and did shameful things. It says the same thing about women. Now, when you abstract the cultural, understanding of gender and sexuality, what you hear there is that there is a natural inclination, and going against that natural inclination is what is problematic. So when you understand the way we gender and sexuality the way we do today, if you talk to a queer friend of yours, a gay friend of yours, he will tell you that his natural inclination is to be attracted to men. So if you apply that principle from the book of Romans to our modern culture, what you find is that it would imply that really asking a gay person to be straight, to go against their natural inclination, is a problem. That's the really frustrating problem. And when you look at other parts of the Bible that where Paul talks about, because you were asking about Paul, like in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, you'll find a word called malakoi. Malakoi in the Greek is not really talking about homosexuality. It is actually this idea of unbridled lust. And the real problem, though, with malakoi is that it's very rarely used in the ancient world. And so establishing a really firm idea of what it means is difficult. So if you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, in an accurate English translation, the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, you'll see malakoi actually translated as male sex workers, male prostitutes. There's another term there, arsenokoitai. Arsenokoitai was translated as homosexual, in 1946. It began to be translated that way only that recently. Is a translation error. We know that there's records of a person writing a letter to a person in the translation committee for the Revised Standard Version saying, I think this is a problem. There's a back and forth. It doesn't get changed, but there is a back and forth of like, oh, wait, we messed up. And there's a whole documentary about that called 1946. The movie, you should definitely check that out. Arsenokoitai, though, is in some ways of translating it, it will be talking about intimate acts between adults and children. There was a practice called pederasty at the time, but really it's illicit sexual acts. And so when you look at the accurate translation of the Bible, the most accurate English translation of the Bible, the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, you'll find that word not translated as homosexual, but as men who engage in illicit sex. So there is your answer as to my take on Paul's actual meaning on gays. All right, we have another question. Oh, wait, Yoshi Van, it's 2 a.m. I'm so glad that you stopped by. All right, another question from Instagram. My Choi, thoughts on translations using modern vernacular and a more thought style message, New Living Translation, etc. Not for a deep study, obviously, but for the reading of large chunks in one setting or audio. I don't have a problem with those. I think the New Living Translation has a lot more of an evangelical bias to it, so I would steer clear of that one. I think that the Message translation is pretty good. The New Living is not a translation; it's a paraphrase. The Message is actually a paraphrase and a translation because it's a paraphrase from the original language. So they started with the original languages when they were making that paraphrase. If you're wanting to dive into really what those verses say and understand their original meaning, those kinds of Bibles are not going to be helpful to you. But yeah. Bill, Stacy, is there a good book for the LGBTQ community? Yeah, there's several of them. There's a book called Unclobber, which I think it focuses on the text of the Bible and what that means. The typically referred to clobber passages that people use to say that being gay is a sin. That's a fantastic book. Dan McClellan's new book, The Bible Says So, has a chapter that's fantastic. My book, How to Not Suck as a Christian, the most recent book, has a chapter on that. If you are talking with somebody who has an evangelical background, I really like the book called Holy Love by Steve Harper. Steve Harper was a scholar at an evangelical seminary. He changed his perspective. He became affirming when he was studying the Bible. And so it's a really great book because he speaks the language of evangelicalism. So it's really helpful book to read. I am also, it's the first time I've mentioned this, I'm in the very early stages of writing a book that will likely come out at the end of next year called A Pastor's Guide to Living as a Queer Christian. So yeah, those are some books that I recommend. If you've got questions, you can post them in the chat. We are live on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and I'm answering those questions. I'll tell you that while I'm waiting on the next question. Oh wait, here we go. Separation of church and state. John, I don't know, his quote in an entertaining read. I'm not I'm not familiar with that. Oh, The Separation of Church and Hate. That is a fantastic book. Yeah. I've had a lot of people recommend that I really respect. If you've got questions, comments, put that in the chat. What about Matthew Vine's book and the Hayes book from a more academic perspective? I am not as familiar with those works, so I can't make that recommendation. If you're looking for a biblical scholar that really addresses it very thoroughly, but not in a whole book, I really do recommend Dan McClellan's The Bible Says So. It has a fantastic chapter. But speaking of academic books, while we're waiting on more questions, people ask me a lot what book I recommend if they're wanting to really get into the deep study of the Bible. This is the one that I say everybody should read. It's called The History of the Bible by John Barton. It is absolutely brilliant. John Barton is one of the world's leading biblical scholars, but he is a unique scholar in that he can speak and write in actual normal language that everybody can understand. And what this book does, The History of the Bible by John Barton, is it gives you an introduction to basically what scholars agree on and believe and how they approach the biblical text. It talks about source material, it talks about manuscripts, and it is just a brilliant introduction to the academic study of religion. And so I recommend that book in just all the time to people. If you've got a question, we are live on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. You can go ahead and put those questions in the chat. I'm answering those here. As you are doing that, I am making a couple of book recommendations of people that I believe in. And if you're a person that is actually struggling with, hold that book up one more time. Absolutely. This is A History of the Bible by John Barton. It's fantastic. All right. If you're a person who is questioning your faith, if you have like doubts and trying to figure out really like not just what you believe, but struggling with the process itself, this book is called, by a dear friend of mine, Brian McLaren, it's called Faith After Doubt. And the subtitle is Why Your Beliefs Stop Working and What to Do About It. He talks about the idea that belief and doubts are not opposites. And something that I truly believe is that having doubts and questions are a sign of spiritual health, right? If you are questioning, it doesn't mean that you have lost your faith. And there's this, especially if you grew up in an evangelical church, this idea that if you are having questions or if you choose not to believe something, you have lost your faith, you've lost Christianity. It actually is rooted in an underlying idea that is what is most likely causing you this anxiety. It's an idea that is really foundational. It's so fundamental in those circles that they don't even say it explicitly. And the idea is that there is one way to believe. That way is the way that often the pastor says that interpretation of the Bible, or that specific stream, that denomination's interpretation of the Bible. What they say about Christianity is Christianity. And they'll say, well, you just believe the Bible. And if you don't believe the Bible, you're not a Christian. When they say you just believe the Bible, what they're really saying is you believe what I am telling you is the correct interpretation of the Bible, when there is a broad range of how people interpret those passages. But when you have that underlying belief that is drilled into you, that if you don't believe the Bible, if you don't believe what this pastor has said, then you are not a Christian, or you're in danger of hell. When you actually start choosing your own beliefs, and when those beliefs differ from that tradition, you're like, well, I don't believe that. I guess I'm not a Christian. But that's not Christianity. And there are many, many, many streams that believe different things, and many streams that that don't have a problem with doubts and questions. My stream of Christianity, I'm ordained in the United Methodist Church, is rooted in a guy named John Wesley's teaching. John Wesley routinely doubted whether or not he was a Christian, whether or not he was going to go to heaven. He's one of the most important Christian leaders of all time. In fact, if you really drill down into any important Christian figure historically, they all have doubts, questions. C.S. Lewis, Mother Teresa, all of these people, but having the doubts and questions doesn't mean that you are not Christian. It just means that you don't believe what that person said. Jesus' call, when you read his life and teachings, what he asks people to do is not ascribe to a specific set of beliefs. He doesn't lay out a systematic theology. He just says, follow me. And so, in my estimation, being Christian is choosing to follow Jesus, the life and teachings of Jesus. And if you're doing that, then you can be a Christian. I understand if you don't want to use the term Christian, because that term has evolved into something that often produces an idea in people's minds of what you believe that is not actually in agreement with what Jesus taught. Yeah. So I'm answering your questions, responding to your comments in the chat. We're live on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. I recommended Dan McClellan's book, The Bible Says So. Jesse something says, some people, not me, would avoid Dan McClellan because he's a Mormon. So it limits how useful it is to recommend to other people you are attempting to engage with if they are more conservative. You're not wrong. However, Dan is one of the world's leading biblical scholars, and his own personal faith practice is not something that he brings into his scholarship. But you are not wrong. All right, Bill Stacy, I loved your video about the scientific findings regarding prayer. Do you provide references on Patreon? I don't provide the references on Patreon. Patreon is a place where you can become part of an intentional spiritual community that I run called Not Church. It's like church. We talk about spiritual things. We're really there for each other. We post pictures of our pets and tattoos, but there's not judgment. It's a really accepting place. If you do want some references for that video, if you'll just DM me, I would love to do that. I tried in that video to actually give some of those references in line, like as I was talking, because it was talking about scientific studies. But if you didn't catch those, you're welcome to DM. Now, I get a lot of DMs, so it might take me a while to respond. I apologize in advance for that. But yeah, if you have questions, comments, go ahead and put those in the chat in TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. On TikTok, The Wielding, love your videos, man. Thank you so much for the encouraging comments. Actually, I get a lot of hate. So just so you know, when you put kind things in the comments for creators like me, they really do matter. All right, I think the user on TikTok is Butkus. Do you think there is a deeper correlation between liberalism and skepticism than conservatives? So I would say that for me, I think we have to define skepticism first. And for me, when I define skepticism, what I mean is that I am not just going to be accepting a belief because somebody says it. I want data. And when I'm looking for data, I'm looking for reliable data in the specific field where that data should be coming from. So if I'm looking for data on the Bible, I'm not going to look for geology, right? Geologists. I'm going to look for biblical scholars. And so I would say that with that definition of skepticism, that my experience is that people who are in the more progressive streams of Christianity, there are more people who are like that than the people that I've encountered in the more conservative streams of Christianity. I can tell you also, though, that in the more progressive streams of Christianity, there are many people that are not really looking for data. They are looking for resonance with their own life and experience. And so that's really not their focus of authority. And so there's a lot of people that I wouldn't call skeptics, really, in those tribes. All right, Theo Psych, I watch your videos. I grew up conservative. I have much church trauma. Now I'm a trauma psychologist. Wow, Theo Psych, thank you for dedicating your life to this. I can tell you, my life, I have this community called Not Church that anyone can be part of. It's full of people who have religious trauma and are still interested in God and spirituality. Some of them identify as Christians, some as atheists, some as mystics, but we're all really there for each other. And in this beautiful, supportive conversation, we actually have channels about purity culture and religious trauma where we process all of that. And you can subscribe to that going to patreon.com/skepticpastor. But Theo Psych, I can tell you, your work as a trauma psychologist is so important. And in fact, many people in our community are taking advantage of the help of people like you. And if you are a person who has experienced religious trauma, I would recommend you find a therapist that specializes in that. Theo Psych, I'll come back to this because I know it'll take a while for you to hear it. But what's the best way for somebody to find a therapist that can help them with religious trauma? Is there a website? Is there like some sort of search term they put in Psychology Today? That'd be helpful. All right, Butkus, any advice on learning to share space with those who are more aggressive in their fundamentalism? Wow, yeah. As you can imagine, I have a lot of experience in this here online with people who are aggressive in their fundamentalism. And I would say a couple of things. The first is to ask a question: Are you wanting to maintain a relationship with these people, these family members, these friends? Because on some level, sometimes the stress and the anxiety of engaging can just be more costly emotionally than it's worth. And just separating yourself from some of that can be helpful. But that's not the reality for a lot of people who love their friends and family and have very different perspectives, and maybe those people are more activists. I think that in that case, I do have a couple of things that can help. And the first thing is that when somebody begins to be sort of forceful, our instinct is to immediately respond to their argument, tell them why they're wrong, and do that. When you do that, that just escalates it. But instead of taking that approach, what I find is really helpful is first to respond with empathy, right? Try to hear beneath their words what is the emotional thing, what is the motivation, and it could be like, you know what I am hearing? It sounds like you're really concerned about my salvation. You're concerned about my eternal destination. Um, and you say, like, I really honestly do appreciate that. Um, the next thing that I think is important, so part of what this is this the strategy is to slow down these engagements um, so that they don't ramp up and get heated. So the first is to respond with empathy. That will catch them off guard, it derails this in a way, in a really healthy way. The next thing, though, is to get clarity on what they're actually saying. So when you're listening to them, you're not listening in order to formulate your response. You're first listening to understand. And so the way you do that is it's a practice called reflective listening. So when you hear what they say, you reflect back like what you understand. You don't parrot it back. You say, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you think that all gay people are going to hell, right? And you say, is that right? Is that accurate? And you know, a lot of times what will happen when you reflect back your understanding, you will realize that what your understanding was actually wrong. And they'll say, actually, no, I'm not saying that all gay people are going to hell. I'm actually saying whatever. And you sort of go back and forth until you have an understanding of what they're saying. And then you respond to what they're actually saying with care and by saying, like, by treating this conversation with respect, right? Not treating them like an idiot, even if they're treating you like an idiot, treating this conversation with respect. The other thing is with these people who you're trying to stay engaged with, if you're in that situation, you're going to see your mom again, your dad again, your aunt. You're going to text with them. You're going to have multiple interactions with them. And a lot of times we have this erroneous way of thinking that we have to have the whole argument, we have to do the whole fixing of their way of thinking in one interaction. And that's just not the reality, right? It's an erroneous perception. And so instead, before interactions, reframe in your head, like, I'm going to have 1,000 interactions. And if I want to try to help them understand something, I don't have to do it all at once. I do little by little. So what I say is, like, just take something small, make a little observation about maybe a queer person that's doing something really good in the world, that's doing what Jesus would have them do, right? You'd be like, you know what? I saw this queer person, they're feeding the homeless, and I thought, like, that's such a godly thing for them to do, right? Very small. And little by little, you have more conversations, you build rapport, and it's not as huge. It doesn't have to all be in one moment. All right. So I hope that helps. We are live on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The psych, Theo Psych, I asked you to help us understand if we have religious trauma, what we search for, and you said, oh wait, no, I don't think you answered that. So let's we've got a couple of comments on Instagram. Ignore the haters. Your mission is valuable. Thank you so much. Contented content. As an Episcopalian, we are encouraged to use both reason and tradition in how we interpret the Bible. Yeah, I tell people that if they're trying to form their own spiritual beliefs, you have to have a number of sources of authority in that process. And yeah. So Theo Psych on TikTok says, I'd like to understand you, Jeremy. Where do you stand on Jesus as a deity, as God? Well, first off, Theo's like, I don't generally share my own personal beliefs. I do that for a couple of reasons. One reason is I'm a very public figure, and when you are that, you have to keep some things for just yourself and your friends, so that you don't feel like, yeah, so that you have that little protected area. The other thing, though, is I don't share my my own personal beliefs in general, because when I share a belief, it brings the weight of my role in somebody's life as a pastor, to that belief. And that means that if at some point they're questioning that belief, they don't know if they believe that. They are now just not questioning that belief. They're also questioning, sort of at this intrinsic, deep level, whether or not I'm credible, or their loyalty to me. My relationship their respect for me gets mixed up in it, and makes that more complicated. And my goal as a pastor is to help people find religious beliefs and practices that work for them. And so yeah, that's just a little disclaimer. What Jesus as a deity, as God, I'm trained in Christianity, so I can't speak in other traditions. But historically, Christians have believed that Jesus is God and God is Jesus. In fact, that was the main focus of the Council of Nicaea. Arius, there was an Arian controversy. A guy named Arius was teaching that they were separate, and that Jesus was not eternal, that came after God, that God created Jesus, and so he's like a lesser being. And the Council of Nicaea decided, no, they're the same person. This is, you get the Nicene Creed out of that. And so really from that point forward, the idea of Jesus being God is a core tenet of Christianity. It's sort of table stakes. But I know people who would say that they're following Jesus that actually don't believe that. But as far as like historical orthodoxy goes, that would put them outside the bounds of the historical definition of Christianity. So Rebecca, you said, sorry, skeptic. I'm not really sure what that question mark is. When Salau, I think, just say there is no higher hate than Christian love. I have experienced that, a lot of Christians being hateful, but characterizing it as love. So Theopsych says, you were stuck in legalism for a long time. People often don't understand what they believe. Teach them. I try to teach people not what to believe, but how to choose spiritual beliefs and practices that work for them. I've got a number of videos on that. There's several methods. The one that I think is the most accessible is something that is called quadrilateral. A lot of people who grew up, as you did, in a more legalistic context, one of the primary problems is that they were never allowed to choose their own beliefs. They never developed that mental muscle of being able to evaluate beliefs and spiritual beliefs and practices. And so when they start questioning things, how to go about that, they need some scaffolding for that, and I find that to be helpful. I do that. I also do that one-on-one with people. If you're ever interested in booking a one-on-one session with me, there's a link in my profile, my work is all online. I don't ask for donations. Everything I do is pay for what you get, but there's a free option for everything. So you can go online. I ask you to pay for that time. Again, if you can't afford it, that's okay. But I do that one-on-one with people about forming spiritual beliefs and practices. I also do meditation coaching. Really just being a pastor. I'm not a therapist, though. Like I do not have the training that you do. Theopsych, yes, teach them through our kindness and love, but couldn't type more. No, I get that. If you've got a question or a comment, I would love to answer those. You can put those in the chat. We are live on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. I think this is great. Somebody was asking about a book recommendation about LGBTQ community, and there's one that I didn't mention that I think is really beautiful. It's a guide for LGBTQ plus Christian teens. It came out a while ago, but it's called Queerfully and Wonderfully Made. And I love this book. It is really practical, and it's very accessible. Like even the layout of it, you can see, is really interesting and engaging, and it addresses all kinds of things, queer cliches and what they teach us, right? What if my family disapproves? Should I come out at church? Is bullying definitely going to happen to me? What about partying? I'm never horny. Should I be concerned? I mean, it's just a fantastic book. It's called Queerfully and Wonderfully Made. I highly, highly recommend this book. If you've got questions, I am answering those. I'm going to do just a couple more before we close out here. We've been on live for almost an hour. So if you've got those questions, you can put those in the chat on TikTok, or Instagram, or YouTube, and I will answer those here. Question: what Bible translation do I recommend? I'm a deep skeptic. I want data. I want scholarship. With scholars, the scholarly consensus is that the most accurate Bible translation on the market right now is the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. New Revised Standard Updated Edition. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. It can be not as readable, but very accurate. For something that's a little more readable but still accurate, I also recommend the CEB, the Common English Bible. If you've got comments or questions like that, what Bible version to use, go ahead and post those in the chat on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, and I will do my absolute level best to answer them. I'm going to do just a couple more if they come in, because I try to do this for about an hour whenever I do it, because I get, my voice does get tired. Do you believe the Gospels are corrupted by a man named Donald Duck? No. The Gospels are not corrupted by a man named Donald Duck. The Gospels are also not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those people, those names were ascribed much later. Fun fact, if you ever need to know that. If you want to deep dive into that, Dan McClellan has a brilliant video of that. So the Theopsych asks, what are your all-time favorite reads? Oh, my goodness, I love books. I will tell you, well, my all-time favorite book, and I know this is problematic, but is the Harry Potter series. I love that. I also love a book called Ender's Game. But when it comes to Christianity and theology, I really there was a book that really formed me that I think is helpful. It's by Brian McLaren. It's called A New Kind of Christian. It's part of a trilogy, and it's like a conversation kind of book, conversation between two friends, somebody who's doubting, who's thinking through what if there's absolute truth, those kinds of questions, and I really love that. That book helped me. Another book. This book really changed my life. It's a short book, but it's called, and it came out in the early 2000s. So it is dated. Disclaimer. It's called Messy Spirituality by a guy named Mike Yaconelli. One of the things that I love, he just has a very realistic perspective. One of the passages in there, the subsections, it says give God 60%, and he talks about how like people will often say like give God 100%. You got to give God 100%. He's like, but that's just not realistic. We don't have 100%. You got to go to work. You got to pay the bills. You're tired. Whatever. And his point of give God 60%, he's like, whatever percent you have to spend on God and spirituality, God will show up in that. Don't guilt trip yourself and make yourself always feel deficient because you aren't giving 100% to God, because that's not possible. So Messy Spirituality by a guy named Mike Yaconelli is a absolutely fantastic book. I also like this book, Faith After Doubt by Brian McLaren, a book on the Bible called The History of the Bible by John Barton. Oh, I think I've got it over here. There's a Christian mystical text called Interior Castle, which I think is really, really amazing. And so if you're into mysticism or into meditation, Interior Castle is a really great book. I'm looking at my shelves to see what I think. Oh, there's a really great deep commentary on the Torah called The Hebrew Bible by Robert Alter. Yes, Alter. It's expensive, but it is absolutely revolutionary. It is life-changing when you really engage with it, and it is widely praised by the scholarly community. You'll actually see Dan McClellan reference it a lot. Another book that I really like is this one called Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. Basically, Kenneth Bailey takes Middle Eastern culture and then helps, so it's like this cultural understanding of the Bible and looking at the Bible culture, Middle Eastern culture, and then looking at the life of Jesus through that cultural lens to help you understand it at a deeper level, right? Understand that original meaning. A book that is on my to-read list, I can see it right over there, that I've heard is fantastic. It's called Jesus for Everyone and Not Just Christians by Amy Jill Levine, biblical scholar and Jew. So that's another great book. I'll give you one more book recommendation. I love Science, A Briefer History of Time by Stephen Hawking. It is fantastic. Where do we find the information about the Gospels? Who wrote them? Go to Dan McClellan. It's easier to search his videos on YouTube, I find. So go to YouTube and search for his things on who wrote the Gospels. Are there any good audiobooks? Yes. I'm trying to think about my audiobook library. Actually, my book, How to Not Suck as a Christian, I got to record an audiobook version of that. You can get that on Audible. Um, oh, yeah. There's a number of books by Rob Bell. He reads them himself. I really like his book. The audiobook version of it's called What is the Bible by Rob Bell is a fantastic audiobook. Let me think. Other audiobooks that I've appreciated. I don't listen to a lot of theology in audiobook form. But yeah, I think that What is the Bible is a good place to start with that. Could you repeat the name of the book from Middle Eastern perspective? Yeah. This is called Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes by Kenneth Bailey. Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes by Kenneth Bailey. It is just a fantastic book. I love recommending that book to people. And in fact, when people get that book, they always come back and say, yes, this is fantastic. Oh, another audiobook, Love Wins by Rob Bell. It's a book about hell. It is brilliant. You should read it. It's the thing that got finally labeled as a full-on heretic by the evangelical world. Yeah. I will say about this book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, it is academic. And so you will have, he does this thing where he talks about the actual structure of passages and parallelism in that. So sometimes there's parts of it that are very dry, very academic, but that's always the first section of a chapter. And then the subsequent sections of the chapters really dig into that cultural stuff and are just absolutely fascinating. All right. I am doing one last scan to see if there's another question. Okay. Where can you study the Bible that's not biased? I don't think there's a place that is not biased because because everybody has that has their own bias. I can tell you though, if you want to really like dive in deeply, Bart Ehrman has, and you can go to bartehrman.com, BARTEHRMAN.com. He is a biblical scholar, but he's really does brilliant online courses. He even offers courses from other scholars. And you can get things like the virgin births in antiquity, Paul and Jesus. And then Dan McClellan has, if you want to dive into biblical Hebrew, Dan McClellan, one of the world's leading biblical scholars, has very in-depth courses on biblical languages. So yeah. All right. That's it. We've been doing this for over an hour, and my voice is getting a little tired. Thank you so much for joining. I try to do these at least once a week, sometimes more. Yeah, if you want long-form content from me, I have a podcast called Unbelief. And actually, in this most recent episode of the podcast, I talk about the Christmas tree, the origin of that practice. We deep dive into the history of it, the pagan practices, Pope Gregory the First. It's really interesting. It's like 20 minutes long. I'm releasing one of those every week right now. You can do that. If you'd like to be part of a spiritual community that is supportive, I run the Not Church community. You can get access to that. It's $3 a month because we don't ask for donations. And it's full of people who are struggling or exploring. And you can get that from patreon.com/skepticpastor. If you'd like to meet with me one-on-one, I do one-on-one Zooms and pastoral meetings. I'm not a therapist, but I do meditation coaching and pastoral conversations, help you think about one belief or another. Find different spiritual practices that might work for you. You can go to link my profile. Link my profile has all the things: the Not Church, the community, the Unbelief podcast, meeting with me, all kinds of stuff. My book, How to Not Suck as a Christian. Right now, I'm giving 10% off of signed copies for the holidays, so you can get that link there. Yeah, thank you so much.